The worldly narrative around who God is that he's just a grumpy old man who wants to take away all of our pleasures and desires. This is the lie that was told to Eve in the garden that led to the original sin, where Satan came and he's like, did God really say you shouldn't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? And Eve was like, ah, yeah, he did say. And then Satan was like, no, go and eat and you'll know. Like, you'll actually know. You'll be like God. And the reason they fell into that belief is because, Satan wants to come in and purport that image of God that, God isn't really out there to do what's best for us. He's just there to be like, nah, I don't want you to do this because, I don't like seeing you have pleasure. Like, that's kind of the narrative around God. And that's what Satan likes to push a lot on us. And it's this mentality that really causes us to struggle in our relationship with God and struggle with like the relationship with sin, because you look at the commandments that God gave us, right? All of the original 10 commandments, and then Jesus came and he's giving us all of these teachings, right? The reason we struggle as Christians with the relationship with sin is that we have this similar mentality. We kind of see it as like a set of rules to be followed, so God is happy, right? Kind of like a teenager. Think of a teenager who's just following rules just so they don't get in trouble. But the moment they get an opportunity to do it and not get caught, then they go and they do it because they don't truly believe, the parents are doing it for their best. Like, they think they know better. They think they know better than what the parents are saying to them. And therefore, when they do it, they simply do it so they don't get in trouble. But the moment the parents aren't there and they feel like they can get away with it, they will do it. And that's the same mentality we have with sin. We don't fully believe that God is doing this for our good, right? We're kind of like, okay, I love God and I want to go to heaven, and I should have sincere faith in Jesus, and it's cool. But like, there are also these commandments that God said we should do. I don't really understand why we should do them, but I'm just gonna try my best to do them, so I don't feel bad about, so I don't feel guilty. But then when we go into that mentality, when there's certain sins that we struggle with, that we like, I don't really know if like this is gonna keep me from going to hell, then it's fine. I mean, it's kind of like when you see the distinction of sin, like the way sin is treated in the church, right? Like, sin is sin. Sin is sin. You don't go to hell for sin, because Jesus came and died for sin. If you have sincere faith in Him, then you will go to heaven. But you can see the way like different sins are treated. It's like, oh, if there's any kind of like sexual immorality in the church or whatever, it's definitely treated as like this next level sin. And there's definitely like merit to that. I actually made a video on like why it's different. But the way it's treated is like, you'll see someone who commits sexual sin and people are like, they completely distance themselves from that person, they're outcast, they're judged. But then those same people go around gossiping, and we all like partake in gossiping because it's like, yeah, it's cool, right? It's like, it's fine, it's interesting, but we don't see it as like bad. But at the end of the day, it's all sin, and we as humans have kind of put our own view on what levels of sin there are, and we're like, okay, I can do this, but I won't do this. Like, look at the thing with porn that people are struggling with nowadays. It's like, okay, I won't have sex before marriage. I won't commit adultery. I won't, go do all the other sexual sin. But can watch porn. Why? Why is there that mentality? Because you feel like no one can see you. You're like, again, you think you think like he's not gonna punish you for watching porn. It's like, oh, okay, and it's like, it's bad, but it's not gonna send me to hell. But having sex before marriage, oh, that'll definitely be really bad. But like, they all do damage. And it's kind of like what happened when Jesus came, right? When Jesus came and he was calling out the Pharisees, because the Pharisees had applied the same mentality to the 10 Commandments, and the commandments, and the not the rituals, but like they basically turned the commandments into like a tradition. And I remember watching this on The Chosen. I don't know if Jesus particularly said it in these exact words, but basically said to the Pharisees, like, you have lost, like, you've taken the law like farther than God ever intended, right? You focus so much on the intricacies of the rules and the like completing the rules themselves. You've lost like what it was meant to achieve, right? The mercy, like justice, love. That's why Jesus came and said, love your neighbor as yourself, love me and only me, right? Because those two like commandments basically condensed all the other 10 commandments into one. Because if you love your neighbor as yourself, you're not gonna like try to sleep with his wife, you're not gonna try and kill him, you're not gonna try and steal from him. But Jesus came and just set the record straight, because the Pharisees and a lot of like Judaism, what it had become was just a thing of like appearances. It's like, okay, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. Like, remember the scene where, well, I say the scene, it's like, I'm watching The Chosen, but remember the part where there's the woman who committed adultery, right? And the law said, well, yeah, I don't know if it was not the law, not the Ten Commandments, but the law that the Jews followed was that, if someone commits adultery, you deserve to be stoned to death. And then Jesus is like, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And everyone walked away because they were all sinful, and it was all about, again, love, justice, mercy, and Jesus came to die for our sins. So the way we look at sin is that we've separated it from what God wanted from us, right? Like when God is telling us all these things, it's for our good, right? It's for our good, and we started treating it like a teenager. Did I use the example earlier? Yeah, I did. I used the example of a teenager, right? And this is what I want to get into. Something that completely changed my relationship with God, or the way I see my relationship with God was, I forgot what it was. I go to a lot of church things, okay, but my church has a lot of like things we do, like Alpha. There's young adults, and then there's just normal like Sunday church service. But my one friend who's a youth pastor was telling us that, like, it was at Alpha. He was telling us about how our relationship with God is less like a teenager parent and more like a toddler parent, right? And he used this analogy of like a kid who got given ice cream, and he was happy, but for whatever reason he was like, I want to go dip this in the swimming pool, right? Because he thought it would taste nice for whatever reason. And the parent is like, no. And the parent yanked the ice cream out of the kid's hand, and the kid starts crying, right? And it's like, we can see, like, objectively in that situation, if I'm the parent, like the parent has done the right thing, and the toddler can cry as hard as it wants, you're not giving them back that ice cream, because they know that if you dip it in the pool, like, all that stuff's going to be bad for the child. The parent's never going to give it back to them and let them do what they want to do, right? And that's such a contrast to a teenager. Now imagine there's a teenager and you're telling them not to go do something. For them, it's like, I disagree. And a teenager, like, they will do something their parents say if they agree that it's the right thing, right? But the moment it's like something that clashes with their view, they won't listen to the parent. And that's where the contrast is, right? I think it ties in really well with, like, why Jesus said, if you're not like a little child, you will not get into heaven, right? Because think about, like, the relationship a toddler will have with their parent. And this was such a good contrast for me, because I remember watching, like, my little brother, right? He would be like, he wasn't a toddler, he was like 7 or 8, and I was a teenager, right? I was like 15, 16, right? And you can see that contrast, right? My mom would like reprimand him, and he'd cry and everything, but 30 minutes later he's like putting in her hands, bro. Like he's he's just back like nothing happened, right? He's back like loving his parent. And it's like, if that happened to me, if my mom did something, to piss me off, like, bro, I'm not talking to her for a day minimum, bro. Like, okay, I grew up in a Zimbabwean household. If my mom calls me, I'm not gonna like not answer, because I'm gonna get the whip. But I'd be angry at her for at least a day, right? Like, how dare you do that to me? And that's where the difference is, right? The contrast. The child trusts the parent fully, right? Like, they fully love their parent. I'm not saying, if you're a teenager and you do that, you don't love your parent, but like, the child understands. Like, they don't understand why the parent did what they did, and they will cry about it to try and get the parent to change. But they'll get over it. And when they get over it, they don't hold it against the parent. They kind of just like, it's like, okay, like, this is my parent. Like, I fully trust my parent. Like, what am I gonna do? Like, run away from my parent? Like, who's gonna take care of me? Like, they fully trust their parent. And that's how our relationship with God should be, right? We should fully trust in him. And the thing with, like, the toddlers, I'm saying that, like, even though they don't understand why the parent is doing what they're doing, they trust them, and they will go back to them. And that's how we should be with God. We should run back to God, even if we don't understand why he's allowing us to go through what we're going through, right? We still trust in him, because the toddler literally has no option, right? Like, literally, oh, you refuse to let me you refuse to let me dip my ice cream in the pool, I'm going to run away from you and go do things my own way. A toddler is never going to do that, because they know they can't survive without the parent. And that's how we should be with God. And that's why Jesus said, if you're not like a little child, you will not get into heaven. Now, how does this tie in with the topic of lust, right? I think this is more like just a conversation on sin in general, in that, back to the toddler conversation, right? When that happens to the toddler still believes the parent is fully doing it for their good. Whereas when you're a teenager and your parent comes and they don't let you do what you want, you're so stubborn-headed and you think you know better than them, that you don't believe they're doing it for your own good. It's like, oh no, my parents don't understand me, they're ancient, they don't know. But it's like, bro, they know, and they're doing it for your good, right? And that's how it is with God. we should truly start believing like in the law that has been given to us. Like, when God is like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, you should do it, like you should do this, love your neighbors, yourself, things like that. If you have anger in your heart, you've already committed murder. Like, just things like that. They things where like, yeah, okay, Jesus said it, okay, God like put it in the Ten Commandments, but like, I don't know. Like, I think it's fine. Like, I think doing this is fine. But if we truly, truly, like a toddler, believe that God, our Father, is doing things for our good, like if we truly and sincerely believe that, we wouldn't have this much of a struggle with sin, right? Go back to the garden, right? If Eve and Adam fully believed that God was doing that for their good, like if they fully believed that God said, do not eat from that tree, and they fully believed that that was for their good, they wouldn't touch it, right? They wouldn't touch it. And when you fully trust, like, your parent, think, again, going back to like a little kid, think of like a kid who wants to go try something and it looks, they don't know anything about it. Like they're about to like step somewhere and it looks kind of scary. They'll look up to their parent, and if their parent says don't do it, they're not going to do it, right? Because yeah, it's like, I trust you. Like, I trust that you mean well for me. And that's exactly the same thing with sin. And going back particularly to the topic of lust, I mentioned it earlier about how there are a lot of people and a lot of us will be like, I'll never have sex before marriage, I won't commit adultery, I won't do any of that. But I'll watch porn. If you like, or you get people in a relationship who'll be like, we won't have sex before marriage, but we'll fool around. And it's like things like that where we believe that, like, oh no, there's no damage, there's no consequence for our sin, right? It's like, okay, God said we should not have sex before marriage, cool. But in my heart, like in my heart of hearts, I still think it's not that bad. Like, what's the problem? Like a classic example is a couple who's engaged to be married. It's like, okay, like, oh, not even engaged. They're couples where like they just dating and they're like, oh, I'm gonna marry her anyway, so I might as well. And it's like, no, right? Like, there are consequences for sin. And again, if that thing falls apart, then what happens, right? And when you go and you watch porn, or you do all the other, or you covered, Jesus said, like, or I think it's the law. It's literally in like the Ten Commandments, of the law of Moses. You must not covet. Things like that. Like, people do that and they think there's no consequence for that. And another like narrative is, like, guys will watch porn and it's like, oh no, when God gives me a wife, then I'll stop. And it's like, no, that damage is going to carry itself into your marriage. Like, God sees things that you don't see, right? He's the author of tomorrow. Like, as I mentioned in the last video, he's perfect. He knows the end at the beginning. He knows everything, right? He's ordered your steps, and he knows what's coming, and he's trying to protect you from certain hurts. And there is consequence for your sin, and you're the one who gets hurt, and that's what God is trying to like protect you from. And I think when we change our mentality around that, when we fully like start looking at sin and just the things that God has told us to do and not to do as not a set of rules to be followed, like a teenager who looks at like the things the parent says and is like, I'm only doing this so I don't get in trouble with you. But then the moment you're not watching over me or whatever, I'm going to go do my own thing. The moment we start switching from that mentality to the mentality of a toddler, where it's like, yeah, okay, you might stop me from dipping my ice cream in the swimming pool, and I'll cry about it. I still trust you. I'm still going to run back to you, right? I still believe you want what's best for me, right? You're looking out for me, and I'll believe what you say. The moment we make that mentality shift is when our relationship, not only with God, but particularly with sin, because I feel like as Christians, we do struggle with that. The notion of like, faith versus works, and like, I love God with my heart, but I still struggle with sin. I think that changes. But you guys let me know what you think of the topic in the comment section below. Make sure you subscribe to join the Self Improvement Brotherhood, and until next time, see you guys.